Hello, and welcome to this episode of ESG Talk, your go to source for insights and advice from leaders in environment, social, and governance. I'm your host, Mandi McReynolds. As you probably already know, September marks one of the biggest annual events on the ESG calendar, Climate Week. In a few weeks, the country and business leaders will gather in New York City to discuss challenges and progress we are making towards a more sustainable future. And what better way to launch our Climate Week series that we are having here on ESG Talk than having the co founder of Climate Week himself join us for this first show in the series? Our guest today is none other than Paul Dickinson. He is a wonderful ESG advisor at Workiva. Paul is the founder and chair of CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, a nonprofit that runs a global disclosure system to help investors, companies, and municipalities manage their environmental impact. Paul, it's such a delight to be with you again. Welcome back to the show and lovely to have you.
Always a pleasure to spend some time talking with you, Mandy.
Paul, since founding CDP in 2000, you've been instrumental in driving climate disclosure and action forward around the world. I love your story about how Climate Week came to be. It was one thing that you told me when we first met. I would love for our listeners to learn about how Climate Week came to be. Please tell us.
Well, it was very exciting. It is very exciting. It's a lovely story and it's a true story. So it runs something like this. CDP was smaller in a certain sense. And from about 2004 to 2014, we had something we called a global launch event. Now, CDP got too big after that, and we would have essentially national events in each country because CDP Japan or CDP Brazil was so big that the idea of a global launch didn't kind of make sense. But when we were running global launches, we would have them in New York. And we would choose the first Monday after Labor Day, which seemed like a really good time. It fitted with our reporting cycle, and it was thought to be like a good time after the holidays. Now, it turned out that I think it was 2006, maybe 2007, definitely 2008. The first Monday after Labor Day fell in the same week as the UN General Assembly. And so you'd have the CDP launch and then you'd have the UN General Assembly. And there was someone called Steve Howard who has been running We Mean Business for a long time and is now at Temasek. But at that time, he was chief executive of the Climate Group. And he thought, maybe we can put all of this together. So he contacted Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and he said, why don't we roll these together and make them into Climate Week? So yeah, it's true. In June 2009, I shared a platform outside the UN with Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Steve Howard, and myself. And together we launched Climate Week New York City. And as they say, the rest is history.
I love that. I remember one of our first meetings. You showed me the photo of the three of you together. And I just thought how instrumental. Who knew we would still see this as one of the biggest convenings? And you're exactly right. I was sitting with a couple other chief sustainability officers, and we were talking about okay, impact reports are out. CDP submissions and disclosures for our investors and suppliers and stakeholders is done. And it's almost like this wave in the fall that turns to this idea of big accomplishments, big action. And as a strategy person, how are we going to make impact for business and society? I would love to know from you, Paul, what have you seen be one of Climate Week's biggest accomplishments over the years?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the idea behind Climate Week is this essentially convening. And why does convening matter? It's about corporations, investors, cities, national governments, and of course, governments from around the world all getting together and thinking about the climate challenge. So I was thinking about your question a bit before this interview, and my mind was taken to 2014, which was really the last time I think we specifically focused on this global launch. And at that time, we had an event in New York with quite an impressive lineup actually. The first speaker was the U.S. Secretary of State. The second speaker was the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, representing all the different countries. The third speaker was the UN Secretary General, and then the fourth speaker was the chief executive of Apple at that time, the biggest company in the world. So we kind of had everybody, I remember thinking, well, how are we going to top this next year? But the point being that there's something important about getting people together. Climate Week has traditionally also occurred in the same week as the Clinton Global Initiative. So there are a lot of people in town. And perhaps the best thing is just the ability to kind of get updated. Like, for example, last year at Climate Week, I just ran into three executives from a big European energy company. And I was like, how's it going? How's the transition going? And they said, well, we're investing 21 billion euro in renewables. And I was like, oh, but what about when the sun doesn't shine and when the wind doesn't blow? And they said, well, we're investing a third of that, 7 billion euro in storage. And I was kind of like, okay, right. Wind, solar, storage, these are all kind of equally important. So I think it's that ability to just have people together in rooms, bouncing off each other.
Well, I think it's interesting to look back, and you talked about some really pivotal moments and convening being a big part of that. So, share with our guests what was one of the more shocking surprises of Climate Week?
I think it's grown every year. I mean, it shrunk a little bit with COVID, but it's continued to get larger. I suppose what surprised me perhaps is to see how its borders have extended. You're at one end of town, there's faith investors meeting, talking about, whether they should divest from companies they don't agree with, because of religious opinions. At another end of town, you've got youth activists talking about how significant it is to hear the voice of youth communicated effectively. You've got in another part of town lawyers talking about how the legal community should be thinking about climate change. On another side of town, you've got advertising people talking about sustainability, promotion of products. So for me, actually, what I found most surprising, but also exciting, and it's something I'm sure we'll come back to, is the degree to which business is now starting to focus on climate as an opportunity rather than a cost. I think it took a long time, and maybe it shouldn't surprise me, but it's now's the time when we're, I think, evolving our understanding of climate change. It's surprising, but I think it's also very reassuring that it's a way of putting climate change at the center of what we do.
I think one of the beautiful outcomes of COVID is that we've also seen Climate Week extend to the virtual stage. And so Workiva, with some of our key customers and partners, are going to have a virtual event and be part of the virtual event during Climate Week and share one of our Amplify sessions, which is our user conference that talks about the C suite governance and policy and how businesses move forward. So, building on that, I love where you went. The boundaries have expanded, and this virtual engagement has allowed people wherever you are in the world to be a part of Climate Week, even if you can't make it to New York that week. So thank you so much for just sharing a little bit of that surprise. And I think it's been a value add as we've evolved together over the years. The goal of Climate Week is to drive action. So you kind of talked about the boundaries expanding and businesses being involved. This year's tagline is "We can, we will." I love, love, love this theme. Paul, what does this tagline mean to you?
Well, there's another little bit of a personal story there, if I can share it with you. I absolutely love that theme and reflects a real promise, I suppose. I actually was working, and before I got involved in climate change, I worked in corporate communications, and I was working with a team in 2014, and we pitched to the UNFCCC at that time the idea for the slogan "We will." And I can still show you the pitch back from them that we sent to Christiana Figueres. The UNFCCC, I think, took our idea and evolved it into what they used as a slogan: "We can, we must, we will." And they used that all the way through to Paris. And it's an eternal call to people. There was a suffragette in the UK. That's somebody, one of the women who campaigned for women to get the vote in the UK. She gave a speech. Her name was Melissa Fawcett. She gave a speech in 1913, and there's a statue of her saying this in Parliament. And she said, "Courage calls to courage everywhere." And I think that that's what the slogan "We can, we will" is all about. And whether it's gathering us together, in 1940, or whether it's in World War, fighting the fascists in 1940, or whether it was responding to COVID, we've got a great history of all coming together. And I feel that slogan, "We can, we will," works really, really well.
I value so much the idea of courage and courage inspiring courage. And out of this week, so many announce courageous initiatives that they are sharing. I'm curious, as you, with this insider view, could tell us, what do you foresee as some of the bigger announcements to come this year?
Well, you know, they're not all sharing their press releases with me, sadly, but I think I've got an inkling of what the meta story here is. And for me, it's relates to taking on something that was launched last year at Climate Week by the Climate Champions team called the Pivot Point Report. And that was really talking about a pivot in the climate movement. And the best way I think I can explain it is a bit through a medical analogy. Actually, I come from a kind of medical family. So if you think about CDP and ESG reporting, which is something Workiva leads on, that's a little bit like an X-ray. It can give you an insight into the patient's health. Then the next stage is what you could call a diagnosis. And I think so many companies, big companies, leading companies committing to science-based targets, so many investors committing to net zero. That's like the diagnosis about like what needs to happen. There are also health improvements that people in medicine call lifestyle changes. So for companies, that might well mean investing a reasonable amount in efficiency and renewable energy and electric vehicles and that kind of thing. But the big thing in medicine is when you need it, you got to have treatment. And treatment, that can mean medicine, that can mean surgery. And that's not something the patient can do themselves. But I think it's what we're starting to see is of increasing importance. So to be specific, what does that really mean? For companies, it means combining, I think, the innovation function with the strategy function, with the public affairs function, and thinking, helping support governments really in coming forward with policy that's going to help to kind of solve these problems.
Well, let's say more about that. I love that you brought up this idea of innovation strategy and public policy coming together for corporations. You shared that in our own ESG advisory meeting as we were working on Workiva's ESG strategy. And I think that's a valuable insight because we'll be uncovering that over this Climate Week series, talking through the risk and the opportunities and the challenges related to products and services as companies unpack those three functional areas. I'm curious, take us a little bit deeper about what steps can businesses take to move towards that significant trifecta of policy, strategy, and innovation.
Well, that is the $64 trillion question, if you know what I mean. And I mean, the first thing I would say is this is exciting. Okay, this is really exciting. Is climate technology boring? The richest person in the whole world makes electric cars. No, this is about, if you look at the unicorns, half of them are climate change related. I'll give you some practical examples from certainly my experience looking at this for nearly a quarter of a century. Number one, the internet is being laid over the energy infrastructure of the world. That's a huge project. There's a big difference between how much energy we consume and how much energy we need. And closing that gap is going to make a lot of money for a lot of people. Think of the food system. It is currently being undergoing a complete revolution. I think there's a lot of discussions about, taxing beef and things like that, certainly in Europe, because it's such a big polluter. But it may well be that people end up eating less meat without realizing. We've only been doing food science for a couple of years now. It's the opposite of cooking. It's, instead of making the same things taste different, it's making different things taste the same. We've just started, but that's going to be a complete revolution. We've got HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning is, linked to that energy consumption revolution. In manufacturing, in everything, there's going to be changes. If I think back to the early days of CDP, we were called Carbon Disclosure Project, but we could have been called the Total Cost of Energy Management Project. I mean, the invasion of Ukraine has shown fossil fuel energy to be extremely expensive, and extreme weather is putting people right off this. So I'm going to give you one final example that I think is enormously important, where money is really changing hands as a result of technology, and it's related to climate change to an extent. And that is actually what I would call dematerialization. It's a huge theme, but you mentioned it earlier. You said Workiva is running a virtual event around Climate Week. I mean, it's great to go to Climate Week personally, and I would recommend people do if they are able to and they want to. But it's also great to participate in an online event. And weirdly, I've had spent about 25 years promoting video communication right up until COVID when I stopped because the world got the memo. We are reinventing the office and how we collaborate and communicate as fiber optics and video communication gets better and better. And think about those technologies that both improve the quality of life, increase effectiveness, and reduce emissions. And that's the sweet spot that everybody should be aiming their business for.
Well, I think as we look at the scope 3 emissions or the areas that you have influence, that's an area where companies are taking those looks at commuting and taking the looks at business travel and how those industries evolve and how people integrate innovation strategy and then the public policy work together of those types of work. Now, speaking of scope 3 emissions and Climate Week, we would be remiss if we didn't say, what do you think the approach to impact with climate will look like as companies try to advance and prepare for new regulation? Some coming a little bit before Climate Week, some coming out maybe around or after Climate Week. What's your advice to help companies get ready for this?
Sure. Well, I mean, get ready. That's the first piece of advice. In terms of getting ready for something, you gotta get ready for it. Let me try and be a little bit more specific. Al Gore has set the context for this pretty well. He said, this is the third industrial revolution, and he points out it's going to be as big as the first industrial revolution, but it's going to move as fast as the second digital revolution. That's why you need to be ready for this third one. So it's about choosing a platform provider that you can be in a long-term relationship with, and recognizing also that there's a really good one, a really important business case for doing that. ESG data, you could call it, or it may have other names in the future, but it's going to be especially climate change related. But the key point is those data sets are going to be with us forever. And great companies, have built ESG platforms. I know Workiva have one.
So, Paul, let's end with an eye towards the future. What will Climate Week 2030 look like?
If I knew that, I would be touting to some of the largest investors in the world that I had some useful information. But I want to mention a sort of meta theme here about a turning point. And I'm going to quote a little bit from someone called Kingsmill Bond, who writes for the Rocky Mountain Institute. He's a really great analyst. And he pointed out to two things that I think are important. First of all, that contrary to the narrative from fossil fuel industry, high prices have actually been destroying fossil fuel demand. But then, particularly, he made an observation about the energy revolution. Okay. And he quoted somebody about two phases of awareness around a big turning point like this. He said phase one is when people realize the system has reached the end of its course. But then phase two is when everyone realizes that everyone else has realized. And I think that that's where we are now. 2022 was when there was a kind of critical mass of the fossil fuel system being revealed for its vulnerabilities. And therefore, we can expect really dramatic increases in the growth in the zero emission system. I mean, for example, I believe fossil fuel investments in 2022 were about $1 trillion. Renewable investments were about $1.7 trillion. So we're actually at an inflection point. There's still going to be lots of debate. There's still going to be lots of back and forth. There's still going to be lots of political discussion. But I would say that in 2030, we're going to be talking about execution.
Well, thank you so much for the honor of your time and a delightful discussion, Paul. What a great way for us to kick off our Climate Week series.
Oh, man, how lovely to have an opportunity to spend time with you at such an exciting moment for industry in the US and around the world. Great to be with you.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us for this episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, ESG, audit, and risk. If you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for more on our Climate Week series, with episodes airing throughout September. We'll be featuring special guests from Coca-Cola, Intel, and the Global Reporting Initiative, and Deloitte. Until then, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to see future episodes on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. We'll talk real soon.